Today we're talking about this very, very sexy topic of fraud.
Yes.
Real estate fraud. Natalka suggested we chat about fraud today, and I thought to myself, oh, it's so depressing. But you know, you're so right. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about how these things happen. I think that I want to preface it, because I always like to feel like we're having fun on this podcast, is that I think it happens less than we think it does. I want to hope that it happens less than I think it does. You have some stats in your handy-dandy notebook and you're going to talk about it.
Always.
But I want to say, before we get into the details, that I know that it does not happen by accident. It does not take one person to cause real estate fraud, that it is a system that is in place, and it's in place now, and there's tons of it out there for sure, systems, but that it is a top-down, it's a top-down problem. So, you know, just like, unfortunately, the hot topic about like a guy stealing a car out of the driveway in Toronto.
Yeah, yeah.
Olivia Chow thinks we have lots of candy. Anyway, I won't get political. But the reality is that it isn't the average one guy that's coming to steal your car, right? Yeah. There is a whole system of people that know exactly what cars, in what neighborhoods, and when that car is stolen, it's taken to the system. It's put into the system and it's shipped. I have a crazy story about cars, and again, I will not talk about it now. So going back to mortgage fraud or whatever fraud that we're talking about, or title fraud, is that it is part of a bigger system, and there are tons of red flags that you can catch along the way, hopefully, if you work with the right realtor and you work with the right mortgage broker and you work with the right real estate lawyer. And it's actually why I am very, very big on a team approach, as you know.
Right.
I believe in everybody being on the same email, everybody being involved in the same thing, involved in the process from beginning to end, because I don't believe in the lawyer coming in at the end. And there are lawyers who don't want to see an APS until it's done. Like, why are you talking to me? Mm-hmm. I want people who are involved so that they can see these signs, if there are signs to be seen. I have a great story before you start. So I got referred a client. It was from a family lawyer that sends me business. She's very, very sweet and instills her clients' trust in me. And it was a gentleman who was selling his house in Brampton. And the agent was clearly not in it full time. Right. Okay. She was hard to get a hold of. And so it kind of came down to the wire. We hadn't seen the mortgage file, like the lawyer hadn't seen the mortgage file, hadn't gotten mortgage instructions. I actually think Joel was involved in this as well. And we started to panic.
So were you representing the buyer or the seller?
I was representing the seller.
The seller, okay.
So I call the agent, and the agent says to me, I don't know, I haven't heard from the mortgage broker. And I'm like, well, have you ever spoken to the mortgage broker? No. So I'm like, okay, well, now I need to get involved to protect my client. I'm like, please send me the mortgage broker's email. I need to get in touch with them. I want to find out what's going on, because we have a real issue. Like, we're closing in like 72 hours and Joel hasn't received the mortgage instructions. Do you know what his email was?
What?
Gameboy1972@gmail.com. I can't make that up. I can't. I almost wept. Like, when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, we're in trouble.
Right, right.
Now, the property closed, and I will never forget that happened. But again, just as a funny story to say, there are things that you can pick up, and it wasn't fraud, and it was just probably some guy who decided, hey, I'm gonna sell mortgages on the side. Right. And the agent was like, I'm just gonna sell a house or two on the side. But I think that if you have someone who is competent in their role as the buying agent or the selling agent, and they know they should be in contact with these people ahead of time, that they're asking the right questions, you can sniff out at least the bad fraud. The good fraud, I mean, it is what it is, right? There's nothing you can do about it. So that's all I'm going to say. Now we're going to hear all about what Natalka has to say because she's really the expert on this.
No, hardly. But I want to talk a little bit about like the different types of fraud, and the one that we're seeing the most, which is the Game Boy fraud. So we have first-party fraud, meaning one person is kind of involved perpetrating the fraud and other people are kind of looking the other way. When do we see this? Typically, let's say you desperately want to buy a home, you can't afford the mortgage payments, you inflate your income, right? So that's one. And then you kind of create
according to the bank, like you don't meet their requirements.
You don't meet the requirements, and so you kind of inflate your income, right? And so that happens a lot.
I was going to say, I think that happens way more than we think.
Equifax has about of all mortgages, like 9.9% likely have a little bit of that fraud. Now, are they overextending themselves? I don't know, right? So that's one. Another type of fraud that we often see, and this is the one where it's like a whole system set up in which like a lot of people are involved. There's a seller who owns a property and a buyer, and they buy and sell it to each other. They both are in cahoots at like huge prices. The buyer then gets a mortgage for an overinflated cost. They have agreement purchase and sale in their hand. They get the funds
from their partner in crime, the seller.
From the bank.
Okay.
They say, bank, I need, let's say this house is worth $2 million. It's not worth $2 million. It's like, let's say really worth like $1 million or something like that. There's an appraiser that appraises it at $2 million in cahoots. And then.
But doesn't the bank send the appraiser?
In cahoots. All in cahoots, right? And then the bank says, okay, so.
I actually I don't even.
Yeah, the appraiser then says, yeah, it's worth $2 million. And then what ends up happening, and this is where you sort of figure it out, the seller says, hey, that $500,000 deposit or down payment, I'm going to gift it to the buyer. They're actually a friend of mine. No worries about it. They get the funds.
Yeah, that doesn't sound sketchy at all.
Disappear. Yeah,
that happens every day.
Yeah,
My buyers.
Don't worry, but I'll waive that $500,000. What? So that happens a lot as well. Here's the new one.
Really?
That a lot. That's.
I'm shocked.
I'm not going to say that.
But
that happens a fair amount.
But that's again going back to what I was saying about a system. Like I, as an agent, regardless of the volume that I do, even would never come up against that because I have to be in cahoots with.
Yeah, you're not involved.
Right. So it's an ecosystem that you can't get entrenched in.
Here's what.
So less to do with like the average person out there. It's very unlikely they would get involved in that. Okay, great. Okay.
This is the one though where unknowingly a realtor could be involved and a buyer could get involved.
And this was in the news. What was it, last year or the year before?
This title, the one that I'm going to tell you about right now, the new type, during COVID, it really took off. Right. And so what ended up happening during COVID is that there would be a seller of a home who would impersonate the actual real seller. Right. Okay. They hire a dupe that kind of so they find the name, all that stuff. They hire a dupe that kind of looks like them, create a fake ID. Like there's a whole system. You get to create a fake ID and all that type of stuff to pretend as if you're the seller. Okay. They typically target homes that they will watch for well over a year, where they know the owners are gone for, let's say, half a year. Snowbirds, right? They target that particular home. In fact, this happened in the news where the people that perpetrated the fraud that were impersonating the seller even emptied out the home when the real owners of the property were away down south. Okay. So what ends up happening, they list the property as if it's their own property. They find a buyer. They have all of the funds wired to their account, the whole thing. They're not really the owners. Buyers even move in. The real sellers come home from vacation or from wherever they are, and they're like, who are you and why are you living in my house? So this type of fraud, it doesn't even have to go to that level. During the pandemic, buyers were not actually even going into the homes, so they did not know that the person who was posing as the owner of the home were really not the owners of the home.
So I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, okay, so, all right, so they hire someone, the the seller's agent has to be
in cahoots.
In cahoots.
Yes.
Right? So.
Or it's for sale by owner, a FSBO.
Or it could be a FSBO.
For sale by owner.
Which I have, oh my God, we should do a FSBO episode. There's so much to say about that. Anyway, and then I would say, so the only thing is, it would need to be, so they would need to have access to search the title. If you search someone's title, you can see if they have a mortgage.
Correct.
So it has to be mortgage free.
Because
it would have to be tipped off when it closed.
Not
No?
So remember that I want the funds to be sent to XYZ bank account.
But if so I'm just playing devil, I'm not challenging
No,
you.
no, no,
So I
no.
just want to understand this. So,
'Cause
okay,
there are-
so I buy this property and on title it
The
shows that
lawyers
you
are
have
in cahoots too.
Oh, the lawyers.
The lawyers representing the sellers in
Forget
cahoots
it.
too.
Doesn't matter. It's all done. Yeah. Because I was going to say if TD has the mortgage, would they not get tipped off that the mortgage was paid out? But it's not getting paid out to them. It's going. They've done fraudulent paperwork to show where the bank.
Correct. And remember, it's as if the seller's actually selling. All of the documents are accurate. The buyer lawyer doesn't know any different. They haven't seen the seller or met the seller. Everything is lining up on their end.
Well, and the reality is that, and this is not a shot at real estate lawyers, but as we've talked about, it is a high volume
business.
So they go through all the checks and balances again if you've got a good one, and they'll make sure that all the due diligence is done properly. Right. But if there's something that you would never catch, there's no way you would know.
So in this one, you also need a mortgage broker, which answers your question as to like the actual mortgage piece as well. So it's not like you said earlier, it's not just like some guy off the street creating this, but rather a mortgage broker, a lawyer, a real estate agent. All three of them have to be in cahoots. Right. And then they have someone that they just pay a couple grand to pose as the seller, and that's how they do it. I'm talking about like millions of dollars, and this is happening a lot more. Of course,
for sure.
Yeah, so this is happening a lot more. Now, here's another one.
In Toronto, in Canada.
In Canada.
In Canada.
In Canada, specifically where there are homes that are not being occupied full time.
Vancouver?
Oh, yeah. Here's
They
another
have
one.
yeah.
Here's another one. Happened to a friend, let's just say.
Dun, dun, dun,
Private
dun,
lending.
dun. Yeah.
Private lending.
Okay.
So, person gets a phone call saying,
what is private lending for
private,
all of our audience?
Yes. That is actually a growing space as well. So what we're seeing, a lot of people, as we all know, are not qualifying with the current, like with the stress test and just current mortgage rates, or they're not really going to get a mortgage from a regular bank because these people are frankly not self-employed, not really claim. This happens often. Don't really claim all of their income. So it looks like they're making a lot less than they actually are. This does happen a fair amount.
Corpse and that type of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Corpse, like they have different types of structures. For example, even if they're in the housing market and they have, let's say if they have a business, they're contractors and they're doing well, but because they're in the housing market, lenders are typically a little bit nervous about that because if the housing market implodes, so does their career. Right, and so therefore they can't likely pay for the mortgages.
It's true, and that got even worse during COVID.
Yeah, even realtors have trouble getting mortgages, from what I understand.
Really?
Yeah, because they're in the business.
Oh, if that's their only, yeah, for sure, I can see that.
Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that when, first of all, self-employed people after COVID hit got severely, not docked, but they were affected most by the way the banks looked at their income for sure, because it fluctuated. Hairdressers, any like hospitality, anything that could have closed that was affected by it. And then you have to, if you're like self-employed and you have a business, you have to be in it for a certain amount of years and show a certain amount of income. So it's really tough. I would definitely say outside of like, there are some B lenders that make it a little bit easier, but yes, that would be why private lenders. And the other rise that in the last year, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is, again, 10 years ago, feels like a gazillion years ago in this business, the difference in interest rates between an A lender and a B lender. Yeah. And a B lender, by the way, is not some guy selling you a mortgage out of the back of his car. A B lender is like a credit union, like very, very respected institution with checks and balances with the government. Was night and day. Like you would never go to a B lender because you were like, I can't afford an 8% or whatever it was. Then all of a sudden the rates started to rise and that delta got very, very small. Yes. And so all of a sudden people were like, I'll do a B lender because I have a corp. I only take $50,000 out of it a year, but I've got $500,000 in that corp, and the B lender might look at it a little differently. Exactly. Don't quote me on that, but that's an example, right? Yes. Or I could go to a private lender. Would EQ Bank, for example, be like would be a B lender?
I think it would be a B.
So again, there's another, like, just so people know, it's not necessarily But a private lender would just be someone who, someone who decides they have equity and they want to invest. It's a different way of investing.
Yeah, so many different types. There's like actual organized mix, mortgage investment corps that do this. There's individuals like Joe Blow down the road that has some cash to spend. And so what happens to in private lending is, one, those scenarios that we talked about in which somebody just, is not going to get a mortgage because they don't show the income, or they've only been in business for a year. And let's say they're making $1 million a year, but it doesn't really matter. They have to be in business for 3. There's all these rules and good rules as well in place.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So they go to a private lender that will typically charge you more. Now, why does a private lender like this space? You get really good interest, and typically there's a strong loan to value, meaning that you're not loaning more than, let's say, 25% of the property. Another thing that does happen too is if, for example, you don't have a down payment that's big, some private lenders will say, like, look, I'll give you a mortgage for like 95% or 90% of the value of the home if you only can put 10% down. So there's a lot of those situations in which you see that.
Could you, with a private lender, potentially do a 5% down on something that was over $1 million? Or they probably wouldn't touch
absolutely.
it? Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. The risk appetite, they just charge you for it. So like the risk appetite varies per lender.
Fair. Okay.
Point being,
we got
no.
But that's a really, I just learned something. Like I don't do private lending. So
and there's the variety of situations. For example, let's say you need a bridge loan. Let's say you bought a property, but you still have to sell your own property. You need the capital to, like, you haven't sold your own property
more
yet.
And more,
That's another private lending situation. They'll give you the money to fill that time until you sell your house, so you have the proceeds to actually buy out that mortgage.
Right.
And then get an A lender.
Right.
Yeah, and then get an A lender to take over that mortgage. Okay. So why am I talking about this? Private lending has started to become a really big space as a result of all of this. So why is there fraud that happens? Because in private lending, the rules are a little bit looser. You don't have an appraiser going to the home that's a bank approved appraiser. So there's a little bit of that can happen.
So they would know that too. Right? They would know that you don't have that appraiser or that checks and balance to go and look at the property. So they're like, oh, by the way, it's worth $2 million.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what's happening within more, I would say, the private space, the private lending space, there's someone that, let's say, owns their property and they have lots of debt. This is also another spot. They have lots of debt and they need to consolidate their debt. Let's say tons of credit card debt at 20% interest. It makes sense for them to get a second mortgage on their property at 12%, right? Take that money, to pay off their credit card debt, and then now pay you the 12% interest. But here's where the fraud comes into play, so be very careful of this space. The seller, let's say, wants a little bit more money than the actual value of their home. They get an appraiser, and they say, our home is worth $1 million. Let's say it's only worth, $800,000, right? And they say, no, Natalka, you're a private lender. Give me $800,000. My home is worth $1 million. If something bad happens, who cares, right? You're going to get your money out. You'll make your $800 back, and everyone's okay. Low risk, right? When in reality, not only is the property actually only worth $800, but more often than not, they have other debts that are registered against title on that property. For example, another first mortgage that, let's say, they have for $300,000. So
you wouldn't be able to pull that up as a private lender?
You should.
Oh, okay.
And do your due diligence before you provide the proceeds.
Right.
Some don't. Some don't. So you give the money over, you don't do your due diligence that there's other things registered or taxes registered. You don't get paid first in the event that you even are the first lender on a mortgage on title as well. If any money is owed to the government, they always get paid first. They always get priority.
Absolutely.
Always get priority.
You are the last person, for sure.
Correct. So there are other debts that they can have that you might not even be aware of that ends up putting you underwater. So what ends up happening is the person that owns the property walks away with an excess amount of funds, and now you're at risk if they default.
So I think that's fascinating. I would think that if I was in the private lending space, I would be doing triple, if not quadruple checks, knowing that, the reality is, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are very good people and they're not scamming, there's no question, but that these people are not able to go through the regular systems. They didn't meet these criteria. Why are they coming to me? What don't I know?
Yes.
And making sure that, I don't know, That's, I mean, I'm not a risk taker. So it's interesting. I want to kind of go back to like that average person who's probably like listening to us going, oh my God, how do I know if like the place I'm buying is actually like the person? What if I buy it? And then so I think one of the things that I'm curious about is, and I want to pick up one that you said, was that usually they're properties that someone watched for a year.
One. Mm-hmm.
Can we assume that it's then that the fraud is probably not happening in condo space because you can't watch it as well, or it's not as accessible and you have to get through condo buildings and concierge and whatever? So I think that's an interesting point to think about, you know, is that maybe just maybe homes in rural areas or that type of thing?
What I would do, work with an agent that actually knows the area. If you submit an offer as a buyer and it's like way over market price, and they're like, sure, you know, or not even way under, like
way
something
under,
that I was gonna say way under rather, and you're like, as a buyer, like, this is too good to be true. They're willing to accept like $500,000 less than like what market value happens to be, which is why, look, I don't sell real estate. I have no vested interest in saying this, but why I would work with a realtor, because they would be able to say, that doesn't seem right. Oh, and
like
by the way,
they didn't even push back. What's going on? Yeah.
So number one is if it's like a too good to be true deal, probably fraud, right?
I would also say, I hate to say this, but like I would also say the brokerages.
That was my next point. Who's a realtor that you're working with?
Right. So I had a client who bought a condo. I don't even know what the brokerage was called, but it was clearly like this guy had opened up a brokerage under his own name, and it was like makeadeal.com. Like it was like that bad. Okay. And so again, going back to Game Boy, I think like you look at this and you say, is this person from a reputable brokerage? Have I heard of them before? Like I've gone to deliver a deposit check to some guy's basement. Like I called my husband and I said, it was like in the West End and some guy had just opened up his own brokerage in the basement, okay? And like I said to my husband, I'm like, this is where I am. If I don't answer my phone in 15 minutes, like this is the address, and call the police. Like, yeah. He's like, what do you do for a living? But at least that and the like makeadeal.com are really the only two I've ever come across that were that, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of deals. But like, I think to myself, those are the things, like, is it a home life? Sorry, I hate to throw like a mortgage, but there are brokerages that do way more part-time stuff. I mean, I think that they would be allowed to operate under that much easier than, you know, a reputable Sotheby's, Slavens, but like even a Remax. Listen, Remax has thousands of agents, but they are a very reputable company.
Yeah.
I mean, my biggest thing was like, I had the brokerage call and verify the brokerage because I was actually worried about dropping off a check and saying, I'm never going to see it again for my clients. That they were going to skip town. Forget like the fraud on the ownership side.
That's exactly another way that they scam too. So you said it, actually, that actually reminded me. Another way as a buyer.
Imagine you told your clients, I dropped it off at makeadeal.com brokerage. And by the way, your $50,000 is gone. Like,
I know, good luck. That type of fraud does happen too on the real estate agents and brokerage account, where they just abscond all of the trust monies from the clients. That happens too. So another element that you hit upon perfectly is that if the seller's emails don't match the name of the sellers. So it's like makeadeal.com or like Gameboy555 or something like that. Just like that's not the name, and that doesn't look like the likely name of the actual seller as well. So that's something to pay attention to. Email can be a really, really dead ringer for like.
Listen, I have to say, I know this sounds really horrible, but like, and there are a lot of great brokers, a lot of great agents that do this, but I'm like, if the broker can't like pay the whatever dollars to Google to have like a custom thing and their name is like first name, last name at Gmail, I don't know. I'm like, I think there's certain requirements you're looking for, and sometimes it's like the small things, but if this guy's just got a Gmail account, I don't know, like it's not ever, and believe me, I hate to say it because like I'm tripping over the words because like I'm saying it, I'm thinking about 5 people I know who are great agents, but like I really believe what are you like?
But
just
they're great
the small
agents 'cause they're in
things.
business for more than a year.
Right, and so-
you have
no,
to
they-
also take a look at that. Like, have they been in business for several years, right? So, because you'll get caught eventually. Like, as a realtor, a mortgage broker, particularly the realtor, had they been working this business for at least 5 years or something like that?
Right, 85% don't make it to year 5 for sure. Exactly. And those people are like, I don't have to worry about Gmail because I've been doing it for 20.
Yes.
Right, so like I'm using that as an example, and I get it. There's some young brokers who are not making any money right off the bat, and they don't want to pay for a custom. I get it. I'm not trying to shit on anybody, excuse my language, but the reality is that there are things to look for that are easy, just like checklists.
Do they have a website? Like things that like, and we're getting high on the minutes here. So we always talk so much, but like, okay.
There's so much to talk about. Okay,
is.
we'll wrap. Let's think about like if we were a buyer in the market, because it's not going to be the sellers. Right. I mean, I guess a seller could get involved if they were to just, Google an agent's name. They could potentially get involved in a.
They typically are the ones that will mistakenly be subject to title fraud. So that I talked about.
That was the other thing, by the way, is that as a buyer, I buy this house. I have my agent's not in it. My lawyer's not in it. No matter what,
Title
for so many
insurance.
reasons, and we could do a whole
Title
other
insurance.
episode. Never say no to title insurance. I don't care what it's costing you.
It has saved me. Title insurance
It has saved tons of people.
Yeah.
Because, listen, as agents, there's only so many things we can check, and we don't know what we don't know, or we can't know.
Yeah, and also the homeowner, after you own, like, make sure you continue to have title insurance, because
Do not cut it off. I don't care.
Fraud is, so let's talk about it from first the seller's perspective. So quickly, to make sure that you're not subject to fraud is, make sure, for example, that you keep checks and balances on what's happening on title. Number one. Number two, make sure you have title insurance.
But interview agents, I think that's also like, if a friend of yours is like, oh, I use this person. When clients call, like say, oh, I'm referring someone, and they're like, well, we're interviewing people. I said, good for you.
Right. But just from a seller, so they're not, a seller who's not
sellers.
intending, homeowner.
Homeowner.
Yes. They're not intending to sell. Okay, make sure you have title insurance always as a homeowner. And also, if you plan to be away for a long period of time, have a friend come in, actually do like a home alone, make it look like someone's living there. So that's a huge piece of it too.
Yeah, have if you can, a neighbor, anything, check on the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Make it look as if you're actually like living there is a really, really big
Even
piece.
if they just know someone's watching it, it'll make all the difference.
And I would also just have a realtor friend take a look and see if you're still the name on title every year. Just take a look. Okay, so that's one. Buyers. If it's too good to be true, it's probably because it isn't. Always visit the property, take a look at who the the seller agent happens to be. Yeah. Have they been in business for a while? Does it look like they have something to lose if they're
Who's the brokerage?
Who's like, deals.com may not cut it, like that type of stuff. So make sure that you pay really sharp attention to that, and always get title insurance on close as well. Yeah. So those are the flags that I would be looking for.
Yeah, I would leave people with it happens regularly, but it doesn't happen as often as you would think. And 9 times out of 10, it could have been
prevented.
Yeah.
One last type of fraud.
Please.
You're a homeowner, you can't afford your mortgage, and you're looking to, and this happens a fair amount, in which someone says, don't worry, transfer title over to me. I'll pay the mortgages on your behalf.
Oh my God, what?
Yeah, this happens a fair amount too. And then I'll transfer it back.
There's stuff that goes on.
Just don't do that.
There's stuff that goes on.
Don't ever give title away. That's just not a thing. Don't do that.
Oh my God, I need to end it there. I can't believe anyone would do that. I guess, but yeah, you can't afford it. I mean, just reach out to professionals. Don't try to make a side deal.
No.
I think that's where it is. When like side deals and cutting corners and that type of thing, there are systems in place for a reason. Okay, thank you.
That was fun.
That was.